RTX 4070 versus the RX 7800 XT, which is the better buy and why? If you seek these answers, then in today's video you shall find, where TechYes has done all the benchmarks for you across 6 different games across 1080p and 1440p. And we've also got the RX 7800 XT reference model that has 2 fans, and we're comparing that against ASRock's Phantom Gaming with its chunky 3 fans and massive cooling solution. It's got the RGB, and same with Galax's X Gamer on the Nvidia side. That has 3 fans that are all RGB lit too. But one big benefit of the Galax X Gamer 4070 is that it requires a single 8-pin connector, which we'll get onto the power consumption results later in the video. But you can see that the single 8-pin versus the 2 8-pin requirements on the 7800 XTs definitely means that one card is going to use more power than the other. But let's pull up the first game here for you, and this is RoboCop Rogue City, a recently released title, and here is where the 4070 and the 7800 XT is coming neck and neck in terms of performance. This is happening both at 1080p and 1440p high settings, and you will notice as well the 7800 XT reference is falling a few FPS behind the ASRock Phantom Gaming. But moving on to Fortnite here, it was pretty much a similar story to RoboCop, where the 4070 and the RX 7800 XT are pretty much falling neck and neck at both resolutions. However, next up we've got Apex Legends, and here is where things start to shift in AMD's favor for their RX 7800 XT, and this is at both 1080p and 1440p. You can see the FPS is higher on the AMD cards. And one thing you will notice, however, the 0.1% are actually a bit lower. That's the worst FPS. So the Nvidia card does do a better job just in this title, at least with the latest drivers on both. When I did the benchmarking here, 7800 XT did suffer a lower 0.1% low, which if you're a competitive gamer, you definitely want to be paying attention to this, especially in a title like Apex Legends. Though moving on to Starfield, this is AMD's sponsored title, and here it's no surprise to see the AMD 7800 XT pulling well ahead of the RTX 4070. And you'll notice that this is the only game I've tested at low settings, and that's because I actually prefer to play this game at low settings versus other games out there. I find the difference between high and low isn't that huge, but the FPS difference is quite sizable. They're going on now to Returnal, and here's where at 1080p and 1440p, the AMD cards, just like Apex Legends, are coming in with higher FPS over the 4070, but the 0.1% lows are actually a little bit worse, and they're in favor of giving the advantage to the RTX 4070, at least in that metric. And then onto the last title here, we've got Baldur's Gate 3, and here's where I find a scene that absolutely presses all the graphics cards you're seeing in the benchmarks here today. And this is one of actually the most strenuous scenes I've seen on not just CPU but also GPU. And here's where on the GPU it manages to choke out the 4070 quite significantly, both at 1080p and 1440p, whereas the 7800 XT does choke out a little bit. It's not as bad as the 4070, and I guess that's where we're sort of finding a scenario, a very niche scenario, where the 4070's 192-bit bus, at least with the CUDA core performance versus the VRAM performance, does start to get maxed out. Though up until this point, you may be thinking, Brian, you've just looked at the raw rasterization numbers. There is so much more to benchmarking than just rasterization numbers. And here's where I do agree, where we're going to pull up the power consumption results. And for me personally, this would be the biggest reason to buy the 4070 over the 7800 XT, would be just the efficiency differences here, where we're getting about 370 watts usage from the wall. Then going to the AMD variant, the XT reference model, that's going up to around 470 watts usage from the wall. And then the Phantom Gaming, which is an OC model out of the box, it uses more power. This is going up to nearly 500 watts. And this is in Fortnite, where we saw those FPS numbers were very similar. So what you've got with the 4070 is a much more efficient card. Now, people will interlude and maybe like, well, Brian, you can undervolt the AMD card, and this could be true, but you can also undervolt the RTX 4070 as well. And here's where those efficiency numbers do pretty much go hand in hand with each other, bringing that difference that we saw before pretty much to the table yet again. And actually the performance drop for the AMD cards is a little bit worse than the Nvidia cards if you decide to undervolt, at least for what I would think is a sweet spot setting. Also, the RTX 4070 does carry the advantage of having better ray tracing performance. Here's why I decided to test out Returnal with the ray tracing settings maxed at 1080p, and as you can see with those average FPS numbers on raw rasterization versus ray tracing, the 4070 does start to show a bigger difference versus the 7800 XT AMD counterpart. And then on top of that, you do have Nvidia's DLSS 2 and 3, but AMD also has FSR 3 and 2 if you like upscaling. So those numbers aside, the final thing to look at here is the two GPUs that we've looked at least versus that AMD reference model, is if the company messes it up, they do a bad job of the cooling solution, that for me personally can make a big difference between make or break in terms of buying that GPU. And here's where I'm happy to say that both ASRock and Galax on their versions of their GPUs this time around have done a phenomenal job on the cooling solutions. Where we'll pull up the Galax solution first here. You can see that this thing is just whisper quiet at 25-degree ambient environment. The auto fan speeds, you don't need to change anything with this GPU. It's going to do a great job in remaining cool and quiet. And then onto the AMD side with ASRock's Phantom Gaming OC, here is where this also is ridiculously quiet and does a great job even over the reference model, and gives you better cooling both on the junction, the hotspot, and the main GPU core temperature itself. Though one disadvantage to both these cards is they are big, chunky 3-fan solutions, and so you will need more room in your case to accommodate this. I'd say they're both not really mini ITX friendly, but they do have RGB and good software implementations, which we will take a look at with Galax first. They've got their Extreme Tuner software, and if you like auto overclocking, here's where you can dial in the pre-tuned one-click OC from Galax, or you can let the scanner tune your GPU and come back in like 30 or 40 minutes for what it would consider the best overclock. However, both these options, I felt they made negligible differences in benchmarks, and in fact, I would like to see more of a focus on auto undervolting, where if I'm to tune a GPU in 2023 going into 2024, I'd just be undervolting my card. Plain and simple. Though the Xtuner software also allows you to control your RGB patterns, the styles, it also, if you have Galax peripherals like a keyboard, you can link them all together from this software. Though the best thing about this software would be, at least over Afterburner, is the individual fan control. Though in terms of tuning, it doesn't have the undervolting options that Afterburner has to a point. You do have absolute voltage maximum, but you can't manually control the max speed that the voltage will hit that clock speed at in particular. And onto the ASRock side, however, we're actually going to do a video on some of the extra features that they include, which works with their 7800 XT. That's their AI suite. And then we've also got the Polychrome Sync software, which is basically RGB control, which you can control more than just ASRock peripherals. I can control, for instance, Kingston memory from this. I can control other peripherals from this software, and it worked really well. The last application from ASRock is their ASRock Tweak, and this is ASRock's tuning software. Very polished, I will say, in terms of a solid looking UI, and you can unlock here the silent mode and OC modes. Though I found, just like the Galax OC, they didn't really make any difference at all. And as you guys already saw with those fan and noise profile settings, out of the box, this thing was whisper quiet with great results. So all this really does is just raise the power limit and lower the power limit for those other two profiles, which you don't really need to do. If you want to undervolt, just get Afterburner and do it that way for a significant power drop. Though you do have the user option mode, and here is where you can control temperatures, fan speeds, mem, and clock speeds. Though with all the benchmarks finished and the examinations of the cards complete, it is time to give you guys that answer of which GPU do I get? Ultimately, Brian, give me an answer. And here's where there's layers to this, and it all depends on you. What do you need from a GPU? I'm going to go into this conclusion and recommendation with my own needs, but I'm going to lay it out there and all the factors to consider. First of all, if we look at the benchmarks, 12 gigabytes of VRAM on the Nvidia card, 16 gigabytes of VRAM on the AMD card. If you are worried about future titles and heavy VRAM requirements, you should go with the AMD card. It's got more VRAM from the get-go. But for me personally, I don't worry about VRAM. I just drop the settings in games if I ever do come into an issue. I'm not big on VRAM and I never have been. So you may wish to weigh that up. The second factor, and this is probably the biggest one I would say that's going to weigh on your decision, is where do you live? For instance, if I check the prices in the US right now, these cards are actually coming in at the same price. The RX 7800 XT is coming over that $500 US MSRP on the streets for around $550 and upwards. The Nvidia card is actually coming around that same price too. And so if I was in the US, I would personally be getting a 4070 just because of the things that I mentioned before with power consumption. And also another thing that I'm going to talk about here is resale value. When it comes to reselling a gaming PC, I find the Nvidia cards, they just move a lot faster. And so for instance, if you want to sell your GPU or your gaming PC a few months down the road, whether you want to upgrade or downgrade, then the Nvidia card I feel is going to allow you to do an easier job of that. But then there's also, if we go back to Australia, for example, where I'm from personally, there's a 100 Aussie dollar difference between the 7800 XT and the RTX 4070. The RTX 4070 is $900 Aussie. The RX 7800 XT is $800 Aussie. So the RX 7800 XT is coming in with a much more attractive price point in Australia. Though if we go over to a place like Japan, the RTX 4070 and 7800 XT are virtually the same price, and if you look on the top selling charts, the RX 7800 XT virtually doesn't exist. So if you wanted to resell a gaming PC in Japan especially, you definitely want to go for an Nvidia card. So what I just said may, if you were looking for an answer, might have complicated things more, but bottom line is both these cards are going to do a great job for gaming. If you're just into gaming, they're both going to do a good job. I don't think you're making a horrible life purchase going with one over the other. But as I said before, I would personally go with the 4070. I think it's got the better power efficiency. It's got DLSS 2 and 3. And of course, it's got that better resale value. Though when it comes to streaming, you've got the AV1 encoding on both options. They're both going to do a great job of streaming. But also I will point out is for me personally with RTX Studio, I find that does work better in terms of editing videos with Premiere Pro than AMD's Adrenalin software suite. So that's all up to you guys to weigh up if you're purchasing one of these cards. But at least I'm just telling to you straight, that's what I'd be doing personally. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then be sure to hit that like button and also let us know in the comment section below what you think of today's recommendation. But I will say one more thing before I get on out of here, and that is with Galax's naming on their RTX 4070, the X Gamer, I think they meant to mean extreme, but usually when you abbreviate extreme, it's just like an X. It's not an EX. Like the X is kind of like ex-girlfriend, right? X Gamer. Did this thing used to be a gamer, but now it's not? So I don't know what happened at the marketing department at Galax there, but I'd like to see them just call it X Gamer with no E in front of it. Anyhow, bit of a pet peeve of mine, but that aside, we've also got the question of the day here, which comes from Dezuigaz 4589, and they ask, what about GTX 1080, Brian? And they're also another question about the RX 5700 XT. In my recent top 6 used GPUs that I'm buying, I was mentioning a heap of different GPUs, and the reason I didn't put the 1080 in there is because I'm buying a lot more 1070s personally. I do come across 1080s, however, and when I do, I do buy them if they're the right price, but I'm just finding I'm coming into more 1070s than 1080s. And with the RX 5700 XT as well, I'm finding I'm just coming into more RX 6600s than 5700 XTs. And because I like to use just budget 450 watt power supplies, the RX 6600 matches really well with those budget power supplies too. So that's kind of why my bias is towards an RX 6600 and also a GTX 1070, is because when I'm matching it up with budget parts, which these two GPUs do go hand in hand with, I'm also saving a bit on the power supply too. Hope that answers that question for you guys. And with that aside, I'll catch you in another tech video very soon. Peace out for now. Oh, actually, yeah, we got the flip up challenge. We sold all the PCs there. We got another episode coming very soon, boys. So I'll see you next time. Peace out for now. Bye.